Welcome back to Grim Advice with Gretta Myers. You've entered the grimoire. Let's turn a new page together. Sorry, I'm a little distracted because right before this, okay, story time. And I have time to do this because the story tonight's really short, or today rather, but I'm filming at night because I'm bad at time management. Anyways, so earlier this week, one of my tripod's legs broke because it's a really cheap, thin, lightweight tripod, and then like 2 minutes before we started rolling, another leg broke, so we had to like tilt the thing, and it's so precarious right now, and if I'm distracted, that's why. Here we go. Without further ado, from my distracted mess of self, this one's also like yesterday, where it's split into different stories. So there are 3 of them this time instead of just 2, and it's called The Elves. So without further ado, The Elves. First story. A shoemaker, by no fault of his own, had become so poor that at last he had nothing left but leather for 1 pair of shoes. So in the evening he cut out the shoes, which he wished to begin to make the next morning. And as he had a good conscience, he lay down quietly in his bed, commended himself to God, and fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers and was just going to sit down to work, the 2 shoes stood quite finished on his table. He was astounded and knew not what to say. He took the shoes in his hands to observe them closer, and they were so neatly made that there were not one bad stitch in them, just as if they were intended as a masterpiece. Soon after, a buyer came in, and as the shoes pleased him so well, he paid more for them than was customary, and with the money the shoemaker was able to purchase leather for 2 pairs of shoes. He cut them out at night, and next morning was about to get to work with fresh courage, but he had no need to do so. When he got up, they were already made, and they found buyers who gave him money enough to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. The following morning, too, he found the 4 pairs made, and so it went on constantly. When he cut out in the evening was finished in the morning, so that he soon had his honest independence again, and at last became a wealthy man. Now it happened that one evening long before Christmas, when the man had been cutting out, he said to his wife before going to bed, "What do you think of staying up tonight to see who it is that lends us this helping hand?" The woman liked the idea and lighted a candle, and then they hid themselves in a corner of a room behind some clothes which were hanging there and watched. When it was midnight, 2 pretty little men came, sat down by the shoemaker's table, took all the work which was cut out before them, and began to stitch and sew and hammer so skillfully and so quickly that with their little fingers that the shoemaker could not turn away his eyes for astonishment. They did not stop until all was done and stood finished on the table, and they ran away quickly. Next morning the woman said, "The little men have made us rich, and we really must show that we are grateful for it. They run about so, and have nothing good on, and must be cold. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will make them little shirts and coats and vests and trousers, and knit both of them a pair of stockings, and you two make them 2 little pairs of shoes." The man said, "I shall be very glad to do it," and one night, when everything was ready, they laid their presents all together on the table instead of the cut-out leather, and they concealed themselves to see how the little men would behave. At midnight they came bounding in and wanted to get to work at once, but as they did not find any leather cut out, but only the pretty little articles of clothing, they were at first astonished, and then they showed intense delight. They dressed themselves rapidly, putting the pretty clothes on instead, and singing, "Now we are boys so fine to see, we should no longer cobblers be." Then they danced and skipped and leapt over chairs and benches. At last they danced out the door. From that time forth they came no more, but as long as the shoemaker lived, all went well with him, and all his undertakings prospered. Second story. There was once a poor servant girl who was industrious and cleanly, and swept the house every day, and emptied her sweepings on the great heap in front of the door. One morning, when she was going back to her work, she found a letter on this heap, and as she could not read, she put her broom in the corner and took the letter to her master and mistress. It was an invitation from the Elves, who asked the girl to hold a child for them at its christening and be its godmother. The girl did not know what to do, but at length, after much persuasion, and as they told her that it was not right to refuse an invitation of this kind, she consented. Then 3 elves came and led her to a hollow mountain where the little folks lived. Everything there was small, but more elegant and beautiful than can be described. The baby's mother lay in a bed of black ebony ornamented with pearls. The coverlids were embroidered with gold, the cradle was of ivory, the bath of gold. The girl stood as godmother and then wanted to go home again, but the little elves begged her to stay 3 days with them. So she stayed and passed the time in pleasure and gaiety, and the little folks did all they could to make her happy. At last she set out on her way home, after they filled her pockets quite full of money and led her out of the mountain again. When she got home, she wanted to begin her work, and took the broom, which was still standing in the corner, in her hand and began to sweep. Then some strangers came to the house, who asked her who she was and what business she had there. And she had not, as she thought, been gone 3 days with the little men in the mountains, but 7 years, and in the meantime her former masters had died. Third story. A certain mother's child had been taken away out of its cradle by the elves, and a changeling with a large head and staring eyes, which would do nothing but eat and drink, laid in its place. In her trouble she went to her neighbor and asked her advice. The neighbor said that she was to carry the changeling into the kitchen, set it down on the hearth, light a fire, and boil some water in 2 eggshells, which would make the changeling laugh, and if he laughed, that would be the end of him. The woman did everything that her neighbor bade her. When she put the eggshells with water on the fire, the imp said, "I am as old now as the western forest, but never yet have I seen anyone boil anything in an eggshell." And he began to laugh at it. When he was laughing, suddenly came a host of little elves, who brought the right child, set it down on the hearth, and took the changeling away with them. Alright, let's go backwards again. It's easier for me. Let's start with this third story. First off, I don't know what it is about the stories of changelings, but they've always fascinated me. Like, first off, we have a name for a changeling, but I haven't come across a term for what happened, like, if there's a specific term for the other, like, the baby that was taken. We know very little about changelings, like what happens to the human children after they're supposedly taken, but we just know that changelings are a great way to explain infant death and misbehaving babies and other things like that. They would blame the fairies and the elves. Like I've said so many times, fairies did not mean like tiny little winged people that are happy and good. No, fairies were big and bad and scary. Like, they were blamed for all sorts of things. Kind of like the Greek gods in mythology were blamed for all sorts of, if something went wrong, it was the Greek gods' fault, and etc. So, yeah, the Fae have a bad rep. I think, yeah, this is the point I want to make with this one, is that sometimes we laugh not because we think something's necessarily funny. Like, the changeling did laugh because he's like, that's ridiculous. You're boiling water in eggshells? That's hilarious. I personally am like, that's kind of funny, I guess. Maybe it's one of those you had to be there things. Anyways, but sometimes people take a laugh as a sign of you thought it was funny. However, sometimes you didn't think whatever was said was funny. For me, sometimes I laugh when I'm really nervous, or like when I'm just feeling awkward, or that kind of thing, or like sometimes when I'm in a lot of pain, like people will make like really sad jokes and then they'll laugh because they're in like emotional pain or like in physical pain, or my point is there's a lot of reasons that someone might be laughing but they didn't necessarily think something was funny. So there's a thought. Don't necessarily take laughter for humor. Yeah, because sometimes people, like, you'll make a joke that you find funny, and sometimes people will laugh because they're like, I don't know how to respond to that, so I'll laugh, I guess. Okay. On to the second one. Again, the second one, she like leaves and then comes back and it's been 7 years instead of 3 days. So again, yeah, fairies and elves, not necessarily good things. I cannot like slap my book enough times. And insert clap emoji here. Like, I cannot stress enough how, especially in grim fairy tales, fae, elves and fairies and leprechauns and goblins and gremlins and etc. 9 out of 10 times are bad for business. Bad business, bad news, bad juju, bad. The point. Capital bad. So, here's a point I want to make. Sometimes people are like, oh, it'll just be this quick thing. Or it'll just be this one-time thing. And then it doesn't end up that way. Like, they'll be like, we'll just be at the store 10 minutes. And it's like 2 hours later. And they're still shopping. And you just want to go home. Not like I speak from personal experience or anything. Yeah. So, or sometimes it'll be like, oh, yeah, like, do this thing with us. It'll just be this one-time thing, and then it turns into a whole thing, and you're like, ah. So here's my point, is that sometimes this thing that you're like, oh, what's the harm? It could only be, like, one thing, and then, like, 7 years of your life are gone, whether metaphorical or literal. Like, I can't, like, if you're getting bad vibes about hanging out with certain people or whatever, or doing a certain thing, maybe don't do it, because it could end up like a 7-year romp in the woods with these elves. Just saying. Take that how you will. And then the first story, I think everyone's heard this story. The elves and the shoemaker and the whatever it's actually called. Yeah, like, I feel like everyone's heard this story, you know. But, yeah, let me just, yeah, it's just this kind of idea of, like, good vibes. You send good vibes, you get good vibes. And even though, like, it says at the end, like, even though, like, the elves stopped helping them because they had nice clothes now, like, things still turned out okay for them, like, you know, just, like, so yeah, like, again, do good things, you get good things. It's practically science. Don't quote me on that. I am in no way, shape, or form a scientist at all. But here's the point I want to make. She could have been like, well, what if they had disappeared? So, what if we don't give them the nice clothes so that we keep getting this benefit, right? And there are some people who are like, oh, I'm scared if I do X nice or good or the right thing to do, I'll lose something personal. Like, if you find a wallet on the ground and there's like bank in there and you really want to keep it, but like there's a driver's license and everything, and you're just like, I should mail it to them, but I want to keep the money, you know. Here's right at the end it says, and from that time forth they came no more, or they had no money from the found wallet or whatever, but as long as the shoemaker or you or me or anyone lived, all went well with him and his undertakings prospered because he did the right thing. Like, it was tough, I'm sure. Like, he was like, ah, darn. Everyone's gonna be like, wow, you stopped making such fancy shoes. What the heck, man? But really, like, it turned out okay in the end. So if you're like, well, I know I should do X, but I don't want to because of, like, understandable selfish reasons. Like, all I'm saying, man, is it seems to work out okay in the end most of the time. and you might feel better about it. I don't know, but that's something I'm waiting to see on. There's a YouTuber I follow who, oh my heck, I love his videos. He does amazing, and he does some really cool, fun. It's called Sandersides by Thomas Sanders, and my camerawoman's cheering in the background. It's good stuff. And he talks about the same concept in the most recent episode of this Sandersides thing, where, well, why do we do good? Like, do we feel good in the end? Do we? Like, and I can't wait for the next episode because it kind of left off on a cliffhanger, and, you know, as one does. I didn't mean to give a shout out to Thomas Sanders. That was not planned, but it just kind of flowed. So, go check out his stuff. It's good. Like, he's way more professional than I am. Yeah. Yeah, and he deals with some stuff like I do too. But, like, in not about talking about fairy tales, but, like, in other ways, like cartoons and talking to himself in the living room for, you know, like 30 minutes or whatever. Yeah, it's good stuff. So we're gonna stop there, because before I get even more awkward while I talk about this person that I think is great. And thank you for joining us for another happily ever after, or not so happily ever after. That's up for you to decide. Whatever you decide is valid. Either way, this is the end for the episode, so tune in later and we can learn more and turn a new page together.